Yeah, a really interesting one from CivilNet.
Okay.
And the title is a little intimidating. Kayono. Kayono.
Yeah.
But basically what it's about is how Armenia is trying to manage all of its relationships with the U.S. and Iran and Azerbaijan with all this tension
Yeah.
going on in the region. So we're talking like high stakes diplomacy, a really controversial trial, and even this like corridor that has Iran kind of on edge.
Yeah, that's always interesting, the way that all of these global events sort of
Right.
weave together, That's like dominoes falling. One thing leads to another, and, the consequences cross borders and everything.
Absolutely. And this CivilNet piece, like it just jumps right in. It talks about some pretty big stuff like
Okay.
the shutdown of USAID in Armenia by President Trump. And you're not going to believe this.
What?
Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that. That was pretty wild.
Mm.
A lot of people probably don't realize that USAID
Right.
has been like a major player in Armenia for years.
Mm-hmm.
They've put millions of dollars into programs there.
Wow.
For independent media, small businesses,
Right.
even like democracy-building initiatives.
Mm.
We're talking about a budget of like $50 million a year.
Mm.
So to see it shut down like that by
Wow.
a president who always talked about, how good he was at business, and then Elon Musk running the
Yeah.
Department of Efficiency, it's kind of like, huh,
Yeah.
what's the plan here?
Makes you wonder, right? It's like they created this power vacuum, and the article even points to the EU stepping in to
Interesting.
fill that void.
Okay.
There's this quote from the EU Special Representative Magdalena Gronow that I
Gotcha.
thought was really interesting. She's pretty straightforward in her observation. She
Yeah.
says that, Azerbaijan talks publicly about wanting peace and stability,
Right.
but then privately, their stance is completely different.
That's a great point. I mean, that kind of highlights how hard it is to get real lasting peace when
Yeah.
you've got all this historical baggage and mistrust. Can the EU actually be a neutral
Right.
mediator when they know Azerbaijan is like playing both sides?
Yeah.
It's a big question.
Yeah, it really makes you think about what everyone's real motives are here, especially with
Yeah.
Prime Minister Pashinyan's recent visit to the U.S. He met with members of Congress, gave a speech at the Atlantic Council,
Okay.
and he even met with Vice President James Vance at the White House.
Oh, wow. So Pashinyan's trying to walk that line
Right.
between Russia and the U.S., keeping them both happy while also
Exactly.
looking out for Armenia's interests.
Yeah.
It's a tough balancing act, for sure.
It is. And the White House meeting itself caused a lot of buzz.
I bet.
Not all of it good, either. Some people were pretty upset that the Armenian flag wasn't there
Oh, really?
during the photo op. They saw it as like a diss.
Interesting.
Others were questioning why Pashinyan wasn't meeting with someone with more influence.
Yeah, like on foreign policy.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh. Just make you wonder what kind of message that sends.
Right. Whether it was intentional or not.
Yeah.
And then you've got Iran's reaction to this whole U.S.-Armenia thing.
Oh, right. Iran. How could I forget?
Right. The Iranian ambassador to Armenia, Mehdi Sobhani,
Okay.
was quoted as saying that this partnership isn't directed against Armenian-Iranian relations,
Okay.
and that they both share this opposition to the Zangezur Corridor.
Right. The Zangezur Corridor. That's another big piece of this puzzle.
It is.
For those who maybe haven't been following this that closely, this is a proposed
Yeah.
transportation route that would connect Azerbaijan through Armenia to its exclave in Nakhchivan.
Okay.
It's become a major point of contention because Iran sees it as a threat.
Yeah, you can kind of see why. Imagine like a highway cutting through your neighbor's backyard,
Right.
and it gives your rival a straight shot to your front door. Wouldn't be great.
Not ideal.
And Sobhani didn't hold back. He was very clear about
Yeah.
Iran's concerns.
I bet he probably brought up
Yeah.
Iran's history
Right.
and its relationship with Azerbaijan. They've got that shared border,
Right.
some cultural and religious ties, but there's also a lot of suspicion.
Especially with Azerbaijan being so close with Turkey.
Right, because Turkey and Iran are
Yeah.
kind of rivals in the region.
Exactly. And with all this tension, bubbling under the surface, this trial happening in Baku
Yeah.
right now isn't exactly helping to calm things down. The article goes into the details of the trial of these former Artsakh leaders, including former President Artsakh Harutyunyan. They're facing charges of terrorism and war crimes.
This is happening in Azerbaijan.
Yeah, in Baku.
Okay, and for context, Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh,
Right.
that's the disputed region at the heart of all the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Exactly.
So this trial is getting a lot of attention because Pashinyan, the Armenian prime minister,
Yeah.
had previously said he was really worried about forced confessions and the mistreatment of these prisoners.
But then the article says that during the trial, Harutyunyan actually denied those allegations.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. He said that they were being treated in accordance with the law.
That's interesting. It makes you wonder.
It does, right? Is he speaking freely? Is it some kind of tactic to protect himself or others?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's just so many layers to this whole thing.
Right.
It feels like it's more about politics than justice.
Yeah.
It just throws another wrench into the peace negotiations.
It really does. And if that wasn't enough, the article mentions another twist, the case of Ruben Vardanyan.
Okay.
He was the former state minister of Artsakh, and he's facing separate charges.
Wow. So we've got international relations, a controversial trial, and this looming corridor that could change the entire region.
It's a lot.
It is. And it's all happening against the backdrop of this long-running conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Right. And that's something we really need to understand the context of.
Yeah, definitely. The Artsakh conflict has its roots in the Soviet era. The region was mostly Armenian, but they put it under Azerbaijani control.
Wow.
And when the Soviet Union fell apart, the region declared independence, and that led to a war.
Oh.
Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced, and it left some deep scars on both sides.
And that conflict has continued to flare up over the years.
Yeah, it has.
And even today, things are still really tense. It's like all this history is weighing on everything.
Yeah.
What does it mean for Armenia's future? You know, they're a small country surrounded by these big, powerful, sometimes hostile neighbors. It seems like they're always trying not to get caught in the crossfire.
It is a tough spot, for sure. But I think it's important to remember that Armenia is not just sitting back and, letting things happen to them. They're actually trying to control their own destiny.
Yeah.
Pashinyan's government is making some bold moves, and they're definitely not afraid of diplomacy.
That's what I find so interesting about all of this. It would be so easy for them to just, side completely with Russia and just be done with it.
Totally.
But they're not doing that. They're walking this tightrope trying to balance things with the U.S., the EU, even Iran.
Yeah, that's what makes their position so fascinating. It's all about leverage, using their unique situation to try and get what they need. It's risky, though.
It is.
Because if they lean too far one way, they could alienate the other side.
Right.
And in that region, that could have serious consequences.
So what's their strategy? How do they keep all these relationships going without becoming someone's pawn? It's like they're trying to stay one step ahead on this giant geopolitical chessboard.
Well, I think part of it is diversification. You know, like Pashinyan visiting the U.S.
Yeah.
That was a clear signal that they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're building connections with lots of partners, trying to not be too reliant on any one country.
Yeah.
We see that in their relationship with the EU as well.
Right. And let's not forget about Iran.
Oh, yeah. Iran is watching all of this super closely. They're not going to just let this Zangezur Corridor happen.
Definitely not. It's a potential game changer for the whole region.
Absolutely. The Zangezur Corridor is like a key piece in all of this.
Okay.
It could totally reshape not just the South Caucasus, but like the whole geopolitical landscape.
Yeah.
We could be talking about changes in trade routes, energy pipelines, even military alliances.
It does feel like a geopolitical earthquake waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And you can already feel those tremors, especially with that trial in Baku. Yeah. It feels like Azerbaijan is trying to call the shots in the peace process and using this trial as leverage.
That's a really good point. The trial definitely highlights how deep the wounds from the Artsakh conflict still run.
Right.
Azerbaijan is sending a message. They're trying to assert their power and keep Armenia on the back foot.
So for Armenia to push back, they need strong partners, right?
Absolutely.
Not just for military or economic help, but also diplomatic support.
Exactly.
They need allies who will stick up for them on the world stage, condemn any human rights abuses, and really push for a fair and lasting peace.
You're absolutely right. International support is vital for Armenia.
And there's one group we haven't even talked about yet who could play a big role here.
Okay, who's that?
The Armenian diaspora. They've always been really strong advocates for Armenia's interests around the world.
That's true.
I've seen them organize protests, lobby politicians, use social media to raise awareness. They're a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, the diaspora is a huge asset for Armenia.
Right.
They have this global network, and they're becoming more and more vocal.
Yeah.
They're holding their governments accountable for their policies towards Armenia.
That's a good point. It reminds us that even though Armenia is a small country, they have this whole global community behind them. And that's something Azerbaijan can't ignore.
Right. It's not just about governments and treaties.
Yeah.
It's about people and shared history.
So with all this going on, what does the future look like for the region? Is lasting peace even possible with all the competing interests and the bad blood on both sides?
Honestly, it's a really tough question. And there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
The one thing that is clear, though, is that things can't stay the way they are.
Right.
It's just too unstable, too fragile. Something has to change.
Okay.
But what that change will be, who will make it happen, and whether it will actually lead to peace.
Right.
That's still a big unknown.
It's like we're looking at this giant puzzle.
Yeah.
And we're just starting to figure out how the pieces fit together.
Yet in each piece, each event, each player has its own story, its own complexities.
Yeah.
That's what makes this whole situation so fascinating, but also a bit unnerving.
So where do we go from here? What can Armenia do to navigate this geopolitical minefield?
Right.
And maybe even come out stronger on the other side?
That's a great question. And it's something we'll explore right now.
So we know Armenia is in a tough spot. What can they actually do to, like, get through this geopolitical minefield? What does a good future even look like for them with all these challenges?
I think it's about thinking long term.
Right.
You know, Armenia can't afford to just make these rash decisions.
Right.
Or side with one power completely and alienate everyone else. They need to be strategic, patient, and really proactive.
Some more tightrope walking.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
But it's not just about balancing. It's about, like, taking control of the narrative.
Okay.
Putting their own vision out there and finding partners who share their interests.
Right.
Not just their enemies. They can't just react to things.
Yeah.
They need to make things happen.
You mentioned Pashinyan's vision for a new Armenia.
Oh, yeah.
What's he actually aiming for with that?
He wants to transform Armenia into a more democratic, transparent, and economically successful society.
Okay.
Think attracting foreign investment, encouraging innovation, creating opportunities for people.
So like making themselves too valuable to ignore.
Exactly. If Armenia can show that they're a stable, reliable, and prosperous partner,
right,
they become a much more attractive ally on the world stage.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's face it, security is a huge concern.
Yeah, for sure.
This whole Zangezur Corridor thing has got to be stressful for them. How can they possibly balance economic growth with these very real threats on their borders?
You're right. Security is crucial. But it's not all about military power.
Okay.
It's also about building partnerships in the region, even if they seem unlikely.
Huh. So you're talking about Azerbaijan after everything that's happened.
Yeah, it's tough. But real lasting peace needs dialogue compromise.
Right.
Finding some kind of common ground, no matter how hard it is.
It sounds like a huge change, though.
It is.
Like both sides would need to build a ton of trust. Is that even realistic?
It's a long road, for sure. And that's where outside groups like the EU and the US can step in. They can offer incentives for cooperation, help with negotiations.
Okay.
Maybe even guarantee any agreements that are made.
So Armenia's future depends on being amazing diplomats.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it also depends on what the other countries in the region too.
True.
Will Azerbaijan compromise? Will Iran soften its stance on the corridor? Will the US and EU keep pushing for a peaceful solution? There are so many unknowns.
It's a lot of moving pieces.
It is. This whole situation is like this giant puzzle, and we're just starting to see how it might all fit together.
And like you said before, each piece has its own story, its own complexities.
Exactly. What we tried to do today was give you a way to understand this whole thing.
Yeah.
To appreciate the challenges and the potential ways forward.
You definitely gave us a lot to think about. It's complicated with no easy answers.
Right.
But you said earlier that we as informed people have a role to play. So what can we actually do to help?
Awareness is key. The more people who understand this conflict, the better.
Okay.
Talk about it. Share what you've learned with your friends, family, colleagues.
Right.
Don't let this part of the world be forgotten.
So spread the knowledge, get those voices heard. I like that.
Exactly. And you can support organizations that are working to promote peace and development in the region.
Okay.
There are a lot of great NGOs doing amazing work, often with very few resources.
And we can always reach out to our elected officials and let them know that we care about this. Remind them that peace in the South Caucasus isn't just a regional thing. It affects everyone.
It really does. What happens in one part of the world always has ripple effects.
That's so true. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. It's a complex situation.
It is.
But Armenia is definitely at a crossroads. The choices they make now will be huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Not just for them, but for the whole region.
And as we talked about, our choices as informed people can have an impact too.
Exactly. So stay engaged, stay informed, and keep talking about this.
Great advice. Thank you for joining us on this journey.
Thanks for having me.
It was fascinating and a little scary at times, but so important. Until next time, keep diving deep.